afternoon. We're really excited today to have a wonderful panel discussion, Advancing the Field of Rehabilitation Counseling, discussion with ARCA Past-Presidents. Looking forward to hearing about some of where we've been and where we have yet to go. The professional development opportunity is being brought to you today by the Florida Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development, which is a division of the Florida Counseling Association, and the American Rehabilitation Counseling Association, which is a division of ACA. The Florida Board Continuing Education Credits and the NBCC Continuing Education Credits are available through the Florida Counseling Association, and CRCs are available through ARCA. My name is Dr. Christine Sacco-Benny, and I am ARCA's Director of the Council on Public Relations and Awareness. And I'm really lucky to be accompanied today by Daniel Bulva, who is ARCA's student representative and past president of FAMCD. We're so pleased that you're here with us today. Before we get started, there is some housekeeping information. I want to make sure that I pin this in the chat before I get started with saying the information for those folks who are interested in accessing the ASL interpreters. We ask that you pin the interpreters rather than using speaker view. That will help you out. And I just posted a link, if you're not familiar with that, how you can pin specific fields. So that is in the chat if you need that information. FCA is a branch of ACA, and ARCA a division of ACA, and therefore we follow ACA's conference etiquette. And some of that information was sent to you in your email with the introduction of today's presentation. So if you're not familiar with some of those, we ask that you just review that. We are asking everybody to please keep their microphones muted, but we definitely want questions. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Both Daniel and I will be moderating those questions to bring to the panel near the end of the panel discussion. We are going to be recording this discussion after the housekeeping information is given, for your CEs, we're asking everybody to please make sure you put your name in the chat, just so our office administrator can track that easily. The second way that we track that is you will receive a link for an evaluation of today's presentation. Upon completing that evaluation, after a little bit of time, once the processing happens, you'll get your CE information. And finally, just a bit of housekeeping. We ask that you look for information about our next presentation, which is CRC examination preparation, what examinees need to know. And that is put on by FAMCD, ARCA, and the National Association of Multicultural Rehabilitation Counseling. And that will be June 4th during the lunch hour, 12 to 1 Eastern time. And with that, I will turn it over to my co-moderator, Daniel Bulva, to please introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much and welcome everybody. We're so happy to have you all here with us during this exciting presentation with just a wonderful panel of incredible past presidents of ARCA and just continued leaders in the profession. And so without further ado, we would like to go ahead and present each of our panelists. And I do want to say the bios from our panelists are very extensive and just wonderful. So we will just be providing a a little bit of an abbreviated version of that, but know that they're doing even more incredible work than what we're sharing today. And so to begin, we would like to welcome Dr. Quiteya Walker, who is a graduate of South Carolina State University with both her bachelor's and master's degrees in criminal justice and rehabilitation counseling, respectively. Dr. Walker received a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from Walden University and her PhD in counseling, rehabilitation, and student development from the University of Iowa. She is a licensed clinical mental health associate in the state of North Carolina, a certified rehabilitation counselor, and a national certified counselor. Dr. Walker has over a decade of education and work experience in rehabilitation counseling and mental health counseling. Dr. Walker is currently an associate professor in rehab counseling at Winston-Salem State University. Dr. Walker worked for 7 years as an assistant professor in the counselor education program at Albany State University in Albany, Georgia. Her other past work experiences include serving as a post-secondary counselor and disability support service provider at Kirkwood Community College in Iowa City, Iowa. She also worked as the director of disability support services at Mississippi University for women in Columbus, Mississippi. She also worked at Aspire Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities as a clinical mental health counselor, where she provided outpatient treatment to individuals with severe and persistent mental illness. Dr. Walker's research interests include ethical issues in counselor education and supervision, multicultural issues in counselor education, disability support services and post-secondary education, self-care of professional counselors, and career counseling. She has over 20 professional presentations on ethics, multiculturalism, disability service, and self-care. Dr. Walker holds membership and leadership in several national organizations, some of which include ARCA, where she served as president from 2015 to 2016, Chi Sigma Iota International Honor Society, where she served as a faculty advisor from 2014 to 2018, and the African American Counseling Association, where she is currently the president-elect. We are so incredibly honored to have Dr. Walker with us here today. The next panelist that we are honored to present is Dr. Yolanda Edwards, who received her PhD in rehabilitation counselor education at the University of Iowa. Dr. Edwards is department chair and program coordinator of rehabilitation counseling. She is also a professor in the program and teaches within the Department of Rehabilitation Counseling and Rehabilitation and Human Services undergraduate program. Presently, her teaching activities are research, both graduate and undergraduate, helping relationship skills, job placement and development, and group counseling. Her research activities on development distance education programs, rural rehabilitation, youth with disabilities, and recruitment of minority rehabilitation counselors. She has been awarded over $6 million in training and capacity building programs from the U.S. Department of Education. And she presently serves as the director and PI of 3 training grants from the Department of Education. She is also co-PI and director of a summer program called REACH Project, which trains youth with disabilities to become entrepreneur in low-income socioeconomic areas. In this proposal, she will be grant management, budget, accreditation liaison, submit and prepare reports, development and design online courses, and so much more. She has authored several articles and book chapters dealing with rehabilitation education, distance education, and disability issues, including mental health issues for African Americans, and dealing with minorities in schools to work with the transition population. Dr. Edwards has many leadership positions in state and national professional organizations, including as well being past president of ARCA. She has also served in many editorial capabilities, such as associate editor of the Journal of Applied Rehabilitation Counseling, and as reviewer for Rehabilitation Education Journal and the Journal of Rehabilitation. We are so incredibly honored to have Dr. Edwards with us here today. The next panelist that we are thrilled to welcome is Dr. Henry McCarthy, who obtained his PhD from Kansas University and completed an NIMH postdoctoral fellowship at New York University Medical Center. He worked for 7 years at a federally funded research and training center in New York, and then taught at Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center for 31 years. He served as an associate editor of 2 peer-reviewed rehabilitation counseling journals for a few decades, and produced 2 educational films on the legacies of 2 prominent women in rehabilitation counseling and psychology. He also served as president of ARCA from 2016 to 2017. Dr. McCarthy spent his entire vocational life immersed in rehabilitation counseling and psychology and disability studies. As an undergrad, graduate student, and professional on sabbatical, he has fulfilled direct service roles in several settings with people, most of whom had physical disabilities, and with their families and employers. His professional career was focused on teaching, advocacy, scholarship, and clinical supervision of students in training. This work brought him to more than 40 cities in the Caribbean, Central America, Europe, and the US. After 31 years on faculty at LSU Health Sciences Center, he retired in 2016. Dr. McCarthy now does consultation on disability issues and volunteer work for various community, cultural, peace, and social justice organizations. His hobbies include swimming, dancing, biking, tennis, photography, and listening to music, and he and his wife of 38 years have 2 sons. We are thrilled to have Dr. McCarthy with us here today. And last but certainly not least, we are very excited to have Dr. Michelle Bradham-Cousar here today with us, who is a certified rehabilitation counselor, supervisor, and speaker. Dr. Michelle was the 2015 Counselor of the Year for ARCA and was recognized by Governor Rick Scott of Florida. She completed her PhD at the University of South Florida, and her specialization is in disabilities, rehabilitation, and counseling. She is also Southern Region Chair for the American Counseling Association, as well as the ARCA Past-President and Florida Counseling Association Past-President. Again, we're so excited to have Dr. Michelle with us here today, and just absolutely thrilled to have our wonderful panelists. And if we read their entire bios and their CVs, that would take a whole webinar in and of itself. So as you can hear and see, they have just absolutely wonderful backgrounds. And again, welcome to our wonderful panelists.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, panelists. So we're going to start off with the hard question. Our first question to all the panelists, and Dr. Walker, we'll go ahead and start with you, and then everybody else can kind of jump in after that. What were your goals when you were president of ARCA, and how were they accomplished?
Okay, so that is a hard question. I had several, I think I had more initiatives when I came in than goals. I think we were in a position where we were going through changes in the profession, and I based what I did on I guess those changes that were going on in the profession. So some of my initiatives, my specific initiatives that we had underway was looking at our bylaws and reviewing the changes that we made in the bylaws. And we worked as a team to get that task accomplished. Another area where we wanted to do was to grow membership. So a lot of what we did were catered towards what can we do for our current members and how can we increase membership. So we took the time to create membership surveys because we wanted to hear from the members and what their needs were. And we did get the membership surveys out, and we launched that to hear from our members. And we also, from that membership survey, we were able to publish an article that came out of that membership survey. And then also strategic planning. We actually, during my presidency, we had a strategic planning meeting where we looked at the next 5 years for the organization. So I would be interested to know what came out of our strategic planning initiatives. But I think my year was very administrative in ways that we could strengthen our organization and grow our organization. So I would definitely say that we accomplished a lot of the tasks that we set out to do, such as corresponding with members, making sure newsletters, strategic planning, those type of tasks were completed. So I would say we did well that year, and I'm interested to hear what some of the others have to say about the years following in terms of how the strategic planning came into action.
I'll go ahead and go next. My presidency was during 2008, 2009. And some of my, well, let's say it this way. What I intended was my goals, and what happened was two different things. But what I wanted to do, and I started at the beginning of 2008, around June, is I wanted to do more collaboration and partnerships. We had already had a really good collaboration between, and that was when we had CORE and CRCC, but I wanted to do more on international and provide more collaboration and partnerships with some of the consumer groups. So we did establish with an international group, rehab group, and then we definitely started getting a lot more involved with the other divisions within ACA. We had always kind of operated in a silo. So what we tried to do is to do more partnerships, very small pieces, sharing resources, doing more presentations together. So that was kind of the first piece. A second one was counselor licensure. During that time, there was kind of an issue within the profession about rehab counselors and licensure. So there are many states that were kind of writing rehab counselors off as far as licensure is concerned, to the point that we couldn't become licensed. So we started strategically targeting state licensure. We looked at AASAB, traveled, did a lot of lobbying with ACA leadership and with governing council as well. And that actually helped, because many of the states started including not only just the CRC exam, but also including rehab counselors in with their general licensure that they had within the states. We wasn't successful with all the states, but we really made that a strategic target. And then the last piece that we did is looked at strategic plan. And so we started putting it together. That ended up being in the next president-elect was able to accomplish that. I got to that kind of late in my presidency, so I wasn't really able to kind of put the strategic plan in place for the next 5 years.
You want to go next, Michelle?
Sounds great. My year actually followed right behind Henry, so it was great. One of the goals in my year was to accomplish the 60th year anniversary conference. Now, let me give you a little bit of tidbit on this. ARCA doesn't have a conference but every 10 years. So that means anything that they've had, any paperwork, anything, they were all owed. So I had nothing to run off of. So we went blindly with the entire help of the team. So all of the panelists were part of the process. And Dr. Walker, she will also share with you, she was one of the co-organizers along with me. And we went in it headstrong, and we wanted to make sure it was accomplished. And so even though during that same year, we had a hurricane, actually we had 2 hurricanes. No, actually we had 3. Was there 3 hurricanes? It was 3 hurricanes. It was 4. It was 4 hurricanes. They shut down everything. And it was, people were like, I don't think I'm coming. I may not be able to come, but we still had it. And I was determined we were going to finish that year. And so my presidency year was that 2018-2019 year. And one of the things that I really wanted to make sure was that the individuals, all of the rehabilitation counselors, had an opportunity to voice their concerns, because we had a town hall meeting with KCREP at the table, and we also have CRC at the table. So we wanted to have that collaboration between what it's going to look like for the next years for rehabilitation counselors. I was a practitioner for 16 years in rehabilitation. And so I wanted to make sure that our voice was at the table as well, that it just wasn't always counselor educators at the table, but people who actually work in the midst of it, work in the field of rehabilitation, and could be a vocal cord in regards to what's happening within our profession. Another thing that I wanted to make sure came to pass, because we were talking about it during Henry's year in regards to the disability competencies, and the structure was established. Then I was just, all I was the next part of that seed planting to get it moving. And so it started in one year, and then each year we began to produce the seed, where that's where we ended up getting the disability competencies done before the end of my year. They actually came out March of 2019. Well, it was like 2018, 2019. It was at the end of 2018 going into 2019. So, and we got it fully past the governing council by March of 2019. So that was an amazing feat. It was enduring, but I'm glad that we were able to get that accomplished. I wanted to make sure that we were able to connect with the membership and to begin to have our regional discussions. So right before I left office, we were able to get some regional representatives for the Southern region. And then also we were able to get an individual for the Northern region. So I wanted to have that discussion so that we could begin to branch out. Another area I wanted to go into was the student area. And so I just kept nurturing other students, and Daniel's a product of that one. So I'm glad that he's here, because he's a product. Even though we started off during my year, it didn't transpose until other people's year. And I think that was a great thing, because then it just shows how, one person plants the seed, another person waters, and and then the organization continues to get the increase off of all of that. Thank you.
Well, I'll start not by answering the question, but by building on two things that Michelle mentioned while they're fresh in our minds. And I will say hats off to Michelle and Quiteya and Yolanda and all the other people from the board and the membership who made the 60th anniversary conference possible, because I was really just feeling like there were so many barriers to it. I mean, Michelle mentioned the hurricanes, but we also had budgetary problems, and there were a lot of things that made it look like it was too much of a stretch. And Michelle was undaunted, and the conference came across great. And one of the benefits that I derived from it is that I met Daniel at that conference when Michelle asked me to impromptu, on the spot, run a welcoming circle. And I ran around the room, and Daniel was one of the more active participants, saying that he was glad to be part of this impromptu welcoming circle. And we've had a good relationship since. And Michelle also mentioned the disability-related counseling competencies, and Yolanda had mentioned not getting accomplished the things that you wanted to. And the disability-related counseling competencies were not a goal of mine. They hadn't even been envisioned. They came about through the brilliance of 3 University of Arizona graduate students, and they wanted to do this as a project, as a sort of doctoral seminar project, and they contacted me just because I happened to be the ARCA president that year. And I was so humbled by their initiative and their brilliance and their commitment to it. And so it started during my year, and I was delighted to work with their mentor and another good colleague from the ARCA board to chair the task force. And as Michelle said, we worked on it for a year and eventually got it published, and it's up on the ACA website. So to answer the question, I did have 3 groups that I wanted to improve ARCA's relationship with when I started my year as president. And the first group was the consumer community. As we all know, persons with disabilities are our raison d'etre, the reason why the profession was started and why we all joined it. And yet, I don't think we have had as smooth and involved in equal partnership relationships with the consumer community as we should, or as I would like to have. And in fact, I wrote an article in 2002 called On Crossing Borders and Building Bridges Over Troubled Waters. And it was sort of a reflection and an anecdotal expression of various ways in which the consumer community and the rehab provider community were not as friendly and as equal partners as it could be. So I was really determined to do that during my presidency, and I made several initiatives to consumer-driven professional groups like the Society for Disability Studies, the Ed Roberts campus, which is this fabulous consortium of about 8 or 10 consumer advocacy groups and provider groups and research groups, World Institute on Disability, et cetera, in Berkeley. And so I reached out to them, and we had a number of good exchanges, and eventually it did result in my deciding to have a pre-conference workshop the year of my presidency's convention, which happened to be in San Francisco, which is it's sort of the Stonewall or the Seneca Falls. Those are the LGBTQ and women's rights, founding places, and San Francisco certainly with Berkeley and all of the work that was done there. So I just felt like we are at the home of the founding of the disability rights movement, and so I wanted to celebrate that. And so we had a pre-conference workshop, and we had 2 fabulous, very wonderful disability rights activists, Jane Garrett and Alex Gaines, and they are very involved in bringing about really concrete legislative and policy changes. And so they each gave a presentation. Neither one of them had had any exposure to ARCA, and they came and gave a really good presentation during the pre-conference workshop that we had the day before the official starting the conference. And my second effort to do that was that I also wanted to do something as much as we could in the community. And so to ACA's consternation, I turned down the opportunity to have the reception, the annual ARCA awards reception in the hotel. And with the help of Heather Brostrand, actually, who is at Sacramento State, she told me about this restaurant in San Francisco that is staffed entirely by deaf persons who use ASL. And so I contracted with them, and we had a sit-down dinner, and we gave out the awards, and we all learned a little more sign language. And it was a really fun event. We took the BART system there, which is another demonstration of great accessibility. And so that was sort of the second expression, the pre-conference and the awards, and also at the convention, I organized the first disability film festival that was ever at an ACA conference. And I worked in conjunction with the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State. He's a very famous disability rights activist and scholar, and he had been at Stanford and at San Francisco State for many years, and he had passed away, and they founded this Institute on Disability. So I worked with them. They actually have an annual film festival, and so it was really easy for them to work on this. But at any rate, so we had a 2-hour film festival in which we showed excerpts of a variety of well-known and some newly produced disability films by people who had disabilities. And then my last effort that was successful was in terms of trying to get more involvement in visibility of persons with disabilities in our organization. That year I nominated Peg Nozick for the Jim Garrett Award, which is the Career Research Award. And I had worked with her over the years. She's a fabulous person, a brilliant scholar. She's gotten zillions of dollars from NIH and lots of other prestigious grant-giving organizations. And she founded the Center for Research on Women with Disabilities at the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. And so she got the Jim Garrett Award that year, and I was very pleased. I will note with sadness that she passed away in November. And so may she rest in peace, but she certainly left a fabulous legacy. The second stakeholder group that I was interested in improving ARCA's relationship was students. And we had a student representative, Taryn Richardson, then, who was also interested in promoting student involvement. And so one of the things that we decided to do together was to try to promote the founding of student chapters at university-based rehab ed programs. And so we did a little campaign that year, and one of the ones, there were a couple of student chapters that were founded that year, and the one at Georgia State University finished its charter process, et cetera. And so I decided I wanted to make a trip. So on my own time, I drove to Atlanta and met with the students and the faculty. We celebrated the founding of their chapter. I gave a talk. We had a wonderful time. And so that was my effort to reach out and improve our relationship with students. And the third one was that I had this vision, and I'm being very frank here, of the ARCA board, sort of being this team, this prize-winning team that was just going to be, working all together on the same agenda. And so I quickly decided or concluded after a few meetings that what I had was a bunch of talented people who had their own ideas and their own agendas and their own career paths. I will admit that I was ARCA president the year that I retired. So I did have a lot more time on my hands than all of the other ARCA board members. So I can remember assigning them. So I said, well, let's just, tell me what your passion is. So I gave this assignment. By the next board meeting, write up what your passion is and how you would implement that passion for the next, 10 months of the rest of my presidency. And so I really, I learned a lesson about board management and just, not having, it's not a high school soccer team. It's a group of professionals who are very, accomplished in their own right. And so I wasn't very successful. In fact, one of my goals, people will remember, was that I was determined to have at least one of either a monthly or a quarterly series of CEU seminars, Zoom seminars. And I have to thank Yolanda because she was the most tech savvy and she had a Zoom account or a web link account or something. And I was still using calligraphy. And so I was being brought on board with technology in that regard. And so at any rate, I was determined to have it and I never had it. So hats off, kudos to Daniel and Christine and all of the other people that made this possible because I was not able to do it in the 12 months of my presidency. And I thank you for the invitation and that we're now rolling with ARCA sponsored webinars. Thank you.
Thank you to each of our panelists. I mean, it seems like a lot of wonderful themes have come up, even though completely different years of presidency, right? A lot of general themes of strategic planning, membership engagement, focus on students, also focusing on looking at the history of disability rights and trying to incorporate that within the organization. And then from there, seeing how ARCA could engage in outreach with the community as well, and community partnerships, both nationally and internationally. And so I thank each of you for the work that you all have done. And it's just so fascinating to see some similar themes, even in different goals, and just how much has been able to be accomplished within such a short amount of time. So truly incredible work. As you've each kind of alluded to, many of the goals that you've had have also focused on kind of the future of our profession and ensuring that ARCA and the membership are set up to engage in more disability-related advocacy and engagement, even after your tenures. And so the next question that we have, and Dr. Edwards, we can begin with you if that's okay, is what do you see currently as some of the disability-related areas of importance that are facing the counseling and rehabilitation professions in today's society?
I think for me, you know, just to let you all know, he sent us the questions prior, so we had time to reflect a little bit. But one of the things, it's funny because a lot of these issues are the same issues that have come up the last 20 plus years that I know I've been involved with ARCA. So, and I hate to keep saying ditto, because I remember when I was a very energetic doctoral student that thought I could do a whole lot. I was like, oh, we can fix this in 5-10 years. And I always thought it was, you know, because back then my faculty were very involved in a lot of the national organizations, and they would, you know, fuss or complain about some of the situations of how it was so slow. And I would always want to criticize and be like, all y'all have to do is just fix one thing. And Henry brought this up, and it's true. We all have all these talents, but trying to get everybody to move everybody in the same place. And especially even with leadership, sometimes everybody has a different focus. And so we focus on that one year, and then the next person comes in and it's different. So one of the kind of disability related emphasis I really feel like is for us to become one organization. This has been kind of, and this is my personal opinion. When I started as a doc student, I might've said something a little different, but this is just my personal opinion for over the years. We have really done a detriment to rehab counseling because we've been splintered. So when it's time to lobby, I have to go to 2 to 3 or 4 different organizations to get to one. When it's time for us to go up to, whether it's a state or definitely with national representation, I have to go all the way up to, they always want to know, well, which organization. You have to show a list, and they're like, that doesn't make any, I mean, where do I get one group to go to that I can disseminate this information and get the information? So really for us is getting under one umbrella or one tent. I know we started it, we fuss about this, but we definitely started with accreditation and getting it under one tent. So we've kind of gotten that. We still fuss a little bit, but you know, we're still under one tent with that. But I feel like with organization wise, we kind of need to get under one tent. The other thing that I feel like now, COVID has kind of exposed areas that we need to work on, providing services for consumers, actually also helping rehab counselors coming out, how to deal with teleworking, telecounseling, telehealth. A lot of times when we, and I don't think it's not anyone's fault, but we didn't really think through, what does that mean? Okay, we're gonna do teleworking or we're gonna do teleproviding services. well, what if your person can't provide services? And how do I teach, for me, how do I teach students how to deal with that environment? Because that's a lot. You're trying to, telework and trying to do all this stuff and juggle while you're still at home is not the best method. If you've got kids or you've got other things going on, it's really hard to adjust. And it's even hard for consumers. I mean, you're trying to get services, and I'm trying to, either whether it be the phone or online, and I don't have online services, how do I get what I need? So those are kind of my two major pet peeves that I would say we need to work on.
I think I don't mind going next, because I really want to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Edwards said, because that's what I was going to specifically talk about, which is unification of the profession. And I think someone also mentioned that in the chat. And I want to cite Circe West, West. She wrote an article on in Counseling Today on unification of the profession. And one of the things that she said was, with unification comes clearer identity, increased self-confidence, and augmented respect from others. And that resonated with me, because as a unified profession, we can have a larger voice. And then when you think about advocacy, we'll have a stronger foothold when it comes to advocacy. And I look at some of the organizations, well, one specific organization, which is social work, and I look at how they are unified. They have one certification, one licensure, so they don't have so many different segments. So I really think that unification is critical for our profession when we think about even how we serve our consumers and how we help individuals with disabilities. And I think once we're a unified profession, we can get rid of fragmentation, all the different rehabilitation counseling organizations. And fragmentation is a paper that I wrote on when I was in my doctoral program. And I think with that unification and defragmentation, then we can advocate and lobby for things like licensure portability. And what does the CRC mean when you're going from state to state? Because in some states, CRC leads to licensure, but then in some states it doesn't. So we have definitely some work to do in terms of how do we serve our consumers on disability-related issues? How do we tackle those disability-related issues?
I say ditto. I believe that as an organization, we're all rehabilitation counselors. We're all counselors working to assist individuals with disabilities. And so I think that we really need to become one. And I think as I was kind of thinking about one of the things, even in the years that, I was over for presidency, I wanted to have that collaboration so that all the groups can come together. And I like what FCA, Daniel, and Christine, they're all doing in regards to bringing the different portions of rehabilitation together in different webinars. And so I do appreciate that, because I think that we need to be a stronger voice together. And I guess that's going to get into one of our other questions, but maybe we can start entertaining counselor compacts and different things like that, where rehab counselors, if they can practice in a state of North Carolina underneath the CRC designation as a mental health counselor, can they still practice in Florida doing the same thing as well? Because I know as a practitioner, I worked with dual diagnosis all the time. And so I was working with the individuals with the mental health disorders. I was working with the individuals with the physical disabilities. I was working alongside the allied health field. And so those are some things that I guess that's why I said ditto.
Well, I certainly agree about the unfortunate fragmentation of our profession. And I addressed that in a later question, number 6, when it asked about advocacy to work on our profession. And for this number 2 question, I zeroed in on the disability related areas of importance. And so I'll just go back to, what are the major buzzwords that we talk about as our tasks, our goals, our methodology, and that is promoting the use of, the benefits of, and the involvement of the disability community in designing and partnering with us in implementing greater awareness, greater accessibility, greater accommodation, real meaningful accommodation that involves the individual and their values and their aspirations. Advocacy, notice that all of these are A words, and I actually wrote an article for the Florida Association of Multicultural Counseling and Development about the 5 A's, and I will add to that the inclusion and technology. Maximize the use of appropriate technology for our work as providers and educators, and for the use of consumers to improve job prospects, communication among self-help groups, etc., and promoting our profession and our relationships. So I think if we just looked at those buzzwords of different domains of our practice and our value system, we would have what we need to keep focusing on for improving our performance in the future. Thanks.
Thank you all. Really appreciate that. As much as things have changed, they haven't changed over the last 20 years. We still have a lot of work to do. But COVID has really brought to light there are still a lot of disparities for people who have disabilities, especially people who are of the BIPOC or LGBTQ plus communities. We've really seen that more and more. And though it's a horrible to see it, it's an important springboard for us, and it can be as professionals. And as we think about what that unification means, I think that brings us to the next question that you all were given. Given where the country is today, where would you like to see ARCA and the rehabilitation counseling profession at large go in the next 5 years?
This is Michelle. Let me start first.
Michelle, you start first.
I'll start first. Actually, I wanted to share back in 2017, I think we were way before our time, but we knew that the time was still consistent with what's even going on right now. Yolanda had us get together and do a presentation on the town hall of police violence. The name was Town Hall on Disability, Race, and Law Enforcement. And we were well before our time, yes, but it was very impactful. And that research right now is relevant even today. And I think that going in the next 5 years, that is something that ARCA needs to come to the table about: the equality, the equal opportunities for individuals with disabilities in the various communities. And, we know in the limelight, in the light right now with a lot of people, it's about culture. It's about people of the Black African-American race, people of the Latino race, LGBTQI race. There's so many things that are going on that we have not had an opportunity to come to the table on those issues. And we're all part of the human race. That's always been my thought. We're all part of the human race. It's just that maybe my perspective on things are different than another person, or the color of my skin is different. That's the only thing that makes me, my shade is just different. So when I look at it, I'm looking at it, are the opportunities equal for an individual with disability if they happen to be a Black individual with a disability? Do they have the same equal opportunities as an individual who is white with a disability? Are the opportunities equal? And I think we've shied away from a lot of those conversations because we want to stick in just disabilities. Yeah, we've done a lot of work on disabilities. Now let's get into the deepness of the disabilities and stuff. And so that's one of the things that I'm currently on a research team in regards to looking at those areas of how that is affecting various individuals' lives as well. And so one of the other things, that was just one, we were way before our time doing that town hall. And I think we need to manifest that back up from the grave. And another thing is to make sure that ARCA is really speaking forward in KCREP. To have that town hall meeting back in 2018, 2019, that shouldn't have been our only opportunity. We should be the main individuals sitting at that table all the years going forward. And we should never let those conversations die at all, because this is a very important field to move forward for all individuals of disabilities in order for them to have the equal access to everything that they are in need of. And so those are some things that I see us needing to move forward in the next 5 years. And then I think the other thing is just coming to become as one, just becoming more as one. I'm done.
Well, I'm gonna ditto Michelle's. That one was very, the town hall she's talking about was very well attended. And we had I think that's, I don't know, but they gave us a large venue. I think it was Michelle's fast talking, because they were able to give us a very, very large venue. They don't never, usually when we have an ACA conference, we kind of like I don't want to say stepchildren, but sometimes I feel like it in getting what we're supposed to have. But yeah, we got this really large room and it was filled. And one of the things that came out of that was the actual training. That's one of the areas that's lacking in is training. The other thing that I had put down, and I hadn't taught Michelle prior to this, but one of the things that I'm running into is just advocacy rights for people with disabilities. So now, we're dealing with police treatment. That's definitely coming back up. But now you got also voting rights, which I don't think people really think about it as we have more and more of the states put some of these voting issues in place for them. It's going to cause a problem with people with disabilities, but no one's really thought about it. It's always an afterthought. And then I'm still going to go back to, COVID-19 really has exposed a lot of stuff, and how do we provide services appropriately? That would be kind of my main three.
Well, I'll add to, I was part of that panel and I learned so much from doing my research for it. And I was never so proud of a presentation that I was involved in as that panel. And I thank Yolanda for organizing it and bringing us together. And it really was ahead of its time. And I have continued that work till this day, and very concerned about and involved with racial justice and police brutality, reform of the culture of our law enforcement system. And so I'll add my echoes to those comments about that session. And I think it is worth looking at, continuing to look at that and expand our work. I wrote out a brief response to this. Where do I want ARCA to be in 5 years? and I wrote, have many more members actively engaged at local or national levels, be more visible and understood in their public image, have a greater impact on meaningful outcomes for the quality of life of persons with disabilities and their families and allies, and perhaps even be the exciting, positive cover story of a national magazine. So someday maybe you'll pick up Time or Newsweek and it will feature rehab counseling and disability studies, the wave of the future, and learn more about who we are, what we do, and how you could contribute and grow us and improve us and expand our impact. Thanks.
Okay, so I want to ditto everything that everyone else has said, but I do want to add this. By the end of this presentation, I think I'll be clear on where I stand in terms of a unification of the profession. But I will say this, in July of every year, I sit down and I write, or I use my I don't write checks anymore, but I use my debit card and I join ACA, I join ACES, I join, of course, ARCA, I join NAMI, I join NAMRAC. I haven't been a member of NRA in a few years, but that will be another organization that I join. I write a check for Chi Sigma Iota. If y'all get to where I'm going, it's we, and the next, here's my, where I wanna see ARCA in the next 5 years. I would like to see ARCA as the premier organization for rehabilitation counseling. And that's just me. And then I would also like to see one organization for the rehabilitation profession. And I know I keep going back to question number 1 and probably question number 2, but I mean, honestly, that is my vision for ARCA in the next 5 years. I feel as if we have that unity, I'm going to Henry's A's. We can work on access issues, equal access. We can work on awareness, bringing more awareness to individuals with disabilities. I still get the question, what is a rehabilitation counselor? I've gotten a question several times on what is the difference between a rehabilitation counselor and a clinical rehabilitation counselor. So by adding clinical, are we further confusing individuals? So, and then also advocacy. So Henry A's, I think that's where I see us in the next 5 years. We need to be a more unified profession with ARCA as the premier organization.
I appreciate those responses. I mean, seeing in the chat box and just thinking about where we are as a profession and exactly, Dr. Walker, like you mentioned, thinking about all of the different memberships that one has to apply for, right? It'd be a lot more effective, right? Strength in numbers to have a unified profession where we can all advocate and do the work together instead of people maybe doing some similar work, but in different areas where there's that disconnect. And so I'm curious as we talk about advocacy, right? And recognizing that everybody is on kind of at a different stage, right? So we have students, we have early career professionals, we have seasoned professionals, we have individuals in leadership positions, individuals who may be considering leadership positions, individuals who may say, I never want a leadership position until they meet Dr. Michelle, who then convinces them into it, which thank you. But just kind of curious, based on recognizing that everybody is kind of at a different stage, from your own leadership and personal perspectives, what do you believe are some areas that students and professionals can do to participate in disability-related advocacy? And that could be any area of advocacy, again, recognizing that there's strength in numbers and each of us can play an active role. So what do you believe that are some areas that students and professionals can participate in as it relates to disability-related advocacy?
I'll start with that one. One thing that students don't know, like a lot of times I remember going out, for me as a professional, going out and advocating with state legislators or national legislators. They liked me okay, but it was just like, yeah, whatever. But if you take, students have a lot more power than, and consumers too, have way more power when we go out to lobby and when we go out to legislators. A good example is we had an issue, and this is just a different group. This is physical therapy. They were getting ready to put something in place dealing with student loans. And so our group here went to one of our legislators, state legislators that are representing in the House, and she's on the education board. She did a whole different turnaround versus for faculty going up there advocating or for folks in the profession. For some reason, students to legislators represent a better fit for you to go out and lobby. So I'm gonna make that statement first. A lot of times, and I started as a student in ARCA, I kind of worked my way up. I wasn't one of those that, you know, did other things and then got into a leadership role. I kind of worked my way up through ARCA. But I will say this, a lot of times with students, you think that, you know, or leave it to somebody else. Don't do that. I'm gonna tell you why. A lot of times you have great ideas, and it's a lot of people on here that have come up through ARCA. I'm not gonna call any names because you came up when I did. And then some of you are making me feel old because I remember when you were like master students and now you doc and professors and professionals, so it's funny. But I will say that just really get involved and use your strengths to start getting involved with leadership. I was a little leery about getting into leadership when I first started. And I got into ACA mentoring. I got nominated for ACA mentoring role through ARCA. And I didn't realize that going to conferences and meeting people, that people would be impressed by you and then would nominate you. And this is someone that had never taught me, didn't know me that well, but had seen me present, and we had a nice conversation and I got nominated, and that's kind of springboard. So I'm gonna say that as far as anything dealing with advocacy and leadership, especially for students, don't feel like you don't have anything to give, because you probably have a lot more than what we have to give. Sometimes my energy level is lower now. It used to be really high, you know, like Daniel, I'm impressed. He's got all this energy. I remember when I had that. Now it's going downhill. But for folks, especially new to the profession, I would say the exact same thing, to kind of get involved.
And I would add, get a mentor. I was hesitant about leadership and definitely advocacy. I remember when I first went to lobby at the Capitol, I had anxiety, but it was just being taught how to do it, looking at how others do it. ACA did a good job at the leadership training on, I guess, spelling out what do we need to do when we're lobbying. So don't think that you're going to get thrown out there. I think what made a big difference for me in terms of advocacy and leadership was having that mentor to motivate me, lead me, and guide me and encourage me. So definitely, if it's something that you want to do, but you're hesitant about it, talk to some of the leaders in the profession, or find a mentor. If you don't already have a mentor, get a mentor. And if you are a professional and it's something that you're thinking about, networking and putting yourself in certain places, that'll help in terms of the advocacy piece. But definitely what worked for me is having that mentor to kind of push me in that direction.
For me, I would agree that having a mentor is wonderful, because actually, Quiteya was just talking, she started off as a student member representative. And she sent an email out to all the students at all the various colleges to present for ARCA. And that's how I got involved in ARCA as a student. And presented my research in Louisiana, in New Orleans. That was my first time ever presenting. And I was just astounded that I had an opportunity to present, one, for ARCA, two, under ACA domain. I was just like, oh my gosh. And my mentor at the university said, how did you get your stuff accepted? How did that come about? I went through the student route. I just said it got accepted. We're good to go. Let's go. So I started as a student with ARCA and built up from there. And I think it was the best investment as a student was to start as a student. And I completely agree. Students can do a lot of great things because out of that presentation, there were questions that came up and it actually became a publication that's now listed in Adult Span. And then it continued on to another publication that I submitted into the Journal of School Counseling. So that was a start and it was a platform to begin to move forward. And so advocacy, I completely agree. ACA does a great job of training you on how to be an advocate. And one of the recent things that they're doing is the Counseling Compact. And I know you guys probably have heard about it. It's very similar to the doctors' compacts and stuff like that, where counselors can go state to state and be able to provide counseling services. So if we end up in a situation in which we are in right now, we can still provide services to the individuals who are in the most need. And so they're training everyone how to do that and how to advocate for that. And I think that's extremely important. And getting that training is very necessary in order to be effective at advocacy, because I have never taken a class on how do I go and approach a legislator? What do I say? And how do I set up my agenda when I'm speaking to that individual that has some influence over an entire state, country, county, whichever it may be. And now, as a result, next week, I go to City Hall for St. Petersburg to negotiate some things in regards to what's happening in our local communities about some equality rights. So I think that I started as a student and now we're up to this next platform of just even next week, we're going to City Hall for St. Petersburg. So I think it's extremely important to have that mentor, get the training for advocacy, start somewhere, just get involved.
A bit of advice I would have is wherever you are in your career path or, as a beginning student, just do some reflection about finding your bliss and following your passion and try to make a connection between that and what you're learning or doing in rehab. And so, certainly we need lobbyists and good, powerful, cogent presenters of information and that can debate our Congress people, but you also can do good advocacy by, writing letters or, teaching people a different framework for analyzing a problem or seeing an issue from a different perspective. And so it's all about using your voice in all levels of volume and the largeness or the smallness of the setting. Personally, I've been on a long time campaign of trying to promote a disability rights overarching framework for all of what we do in rehab, education, practice, research, et cetera, and specifically to get consciousness about this perspective to become as popular as other human rights platforms, for example, against racism, misogyny, ethnocentrism. So, for example, I just got an article published the first two words of which are disability justice. And so I'm trying to get that term and its true understanding to become as popular as racial justice or environmental justice or the Black Lives Matter movement and Me Too movements hashtags. And so that the discrimination and oppression that persons with disabilities experience on a interpersonal and a systemic structural level becomes embodied in a term that is a key word for discussing it, for doing research, for finding out more of what's going on, and for using social media to broadcast the message. Thanks.
Thank you all. I really appreciate your honesty in your answers. And I think that's what is so important, is to speak from your heart when we're having this kind of panel discussion. It is an important piece to put those things on the table so that we can have discussion around it, that all ideas are welcome. Daniel and I were just looking at the time, and we definitely want to get to some of our participants' questions. So I have a couple questions. We'll start off, and I apologize, I just cut and pasted the questions, so I can't quite remember who all wrote them. So if you're the author, please know that this is your wonderful question. Panelists, over the last couple of years, ACA has lost two of their largest member groups, ASCA and AMCA. How are you thinking of uniting the counseling profession? My understanding is that the reason they left is they disagreed with the generic counseling definition and focus.
Well, I noticed there were a couple of chat contributions about that. You know, what are we talking about in terms of fragmentation and unification? And I hope this addressed the question and those others. Personally, I think, and I think the other panelists were talking about within the rehab counseling profession is that we have this proliferation of associations, you know, ARCA, NARCA, NAMRAC, NRA, you know, AHEAD. There are so many disability-focused organizations or rehab counseling organizations. And if we had more unity among those, if we had a singular, powerful, clear identity group, then we would have a better place within the counseling profession itself. And so I think we were talking about not so much uniting the counseling profession as uniting the rehabilitation focused aspects of counseling, service delivery, research, etc. That's my perspective.
I'm going to agree with Henry, but then also add on to that. We have always had this problem of fragmentation, so it's not a new concept at all. One of the issues that we have is that, and this is the problem I have with trying to join as a counselor first. A lot of people's identity might not be a counselor. That might not be where they're training, how they perceive their identity. So when you're trying to put everybody under the same hat, you got to have at least one thing that we're all in agreement on. And I think for rehab counselors, sometimes before we even are able to address, are you a counselor first, we're still dealing with fragmentation within our own profession. So that's kind of always been kind of an issue internally. I think that was a detriment for us when it came time for, you know, they talked about the core KCREP merger. That was a piece that kept floating up because we've never really addressed it like we should have. And again, from my perspective, I was trained as a counselor first, and then I'm a rehab counselor second. So my thinking is very different. And one thing I notice, as we have different leaderships in different organizations, that might not be their focus. So as they change, we always have issues with this, and we've never really come to terms with it. So it's almost like you can't move forward until we kind of fix. And this goes back to what Dr. Walker or Quiteya was talking about. We really haven't fixed that yet. So you can't even move to talking about joining with other counseling organizations when you're still fighting amongst yourselves. And you know, I call it, I'll just make it real clear, like fighting amongst yourselves to be the top dog. I mean, we're all doing the same thing. Why does it have to be separate organizations? And Quiteya said this best, you know, she writes checks for all these different entities. Why am I doing that? I'm not, I mean, social work doesn't do that. AMA doesn't do that. You know, you're part of one big profession. Then if you want to splinter out a little bit, but the main group is the one that you do. I think that would help a lot with membership in general. It used to be like that. That was back probably in the 80s, where, you know, you had, and ARCA was much larger then too. So that's just something that we kind of need to address first before we can even get to talking about the other organizations as well. But to be quite honest, if you talk to some of the organizations, they have internal issues as well. So that's why sometimes they will have left ASCA, and then also ARCA, why they actually have left ACA.
I guess I could share. Totally. One of the things that, even just a realization of what's happened with COVID, it's going to become an individual response. If an organization chooses to leave, they choose to leave on their own accord, and there's nothing we can do if their heart is no longer with us. What we do is we continue to function and move forward so that we can have the betterment of the entire group. Because recently, even during COVID, ACA, now I'm speaking on ACA Southern Region Chair, which is my current position. We have 25,000 counselors within the Southern Region, and that's 14 states that I cover. And we have increased. ACA alone has increased to, we were running the numbers, and they have increased just within this last year. Membership has increased a large bit, which they did see over 7,000 members even at the conference this last year as well. So I think it becomes an individual's response. If the individuals continue to say, you know, this is where I'm going to be, and they continue to put their money wherever they're at, organizations are going to continue to thrive. So when individuals began to write out the checks or do the deposits to the different organization, and then say, can we have a focus that is as a one united front? We just need more of our own community to speak up in regards to that. And if we were just like the social workers, we would have a larger voice even in advocacy as well. And so I think it becomes extremely important that we have that one voice. And that's why I put in the chat earlier, we're stronger together. And when we continue to splinter, it's not good for our organization, not even for the counseling profession at all. So that's kind of one of my things that I'm looking at, and would hope that we can become one.
And I just want to echo, I think everyone has said it best, Henry, Yolanda, and Michelle. So I really don't have anything else to add other than just to echo what they just stated.
Thank you. Again, really appreciate. We have another question from one of our participants. Do you have any specific recommendations for advocacy with CACREP standards revisions? The author of this question also just put out a friendly reminder that draft one is up for review, and thank you, Dr. Peterson. Put the link for that as well. And any suggestions from our panelists in terms of advocacy as it relates to CACREP and CACREP standards?
thing that I have always learned is that when it comes to organizations, you need to get involved. So when they have that call out for be on the CAPREP board, we need to have ARCA representation. CAPREP used to be designed where the different divisions would have representation within CAPREP. So ARCA used to have their own representative. And you know, they kind of restructured that. So now they have it where their board members actually have to submit and get voted on. So I will say this, that to start getting more involved and get more individuals whose identity is more rehab counselor, that would help too. Definitely, I'm going to put out that plug again, is to put in your feedback for the CAPREP standards revisions. But the second piece is to get more involved. I think what has happened over the years is that we have not had that seat at the table or had enough voice at the table to be able to make some changes.
Yeah, I would definitely say get involved. Also share the link, make sure that our colleagues, our rehabilitation counseling professionals, make sure we are a voice at the table by flooding them with our recommendations. Because if we don't respond to the call, then they'll think that, you know, we don't care. So the number one thing is to have your voice heard. So respond and share it and encourage your colleagues to respond, because we have to, even if we're not at the table, they're giving us, we need to be at the table. I 100% agree. But if we're not at the table, make our voice heard by participating and also responding, volunteering, becoming active on CAPREP board, and becoming active and making sure rehabilitation counselors are heard.
I'd say get in touch with or follow the recommendations of people like Sonia Peterson and others who are directly involved in the issue and are strong advocates for our philosophy and perspective and profession, and see what you can do just as a local advocate or disseminator of information, or keeping it on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. One of the other things that I think that we can add to that is the programs that still have the influence of rehabilitation, that they stay headstrong in regards to that and continue to push forward for the organization to continue to hear our voice. Even at that town hall meeting, I know I go back to it, but one of the questions I brought to the CAPREP board was why is there not one area that just says disability? How can that be number 9, just disability, that everyone understands? And that's one of the things I even wrote up in my dissertation, is that disabilities happen to everyone's home. Someone's been affected by disability. Now that we've had COVID recently, someone has been affected by someone death, dying, or whatever has happened. And so we know that disability affects everyone's home. That means that counselors at some point in time will come into contact with an individual that has a disability. And do they know how to effectively work with an individual with a disability? And I think that it's now time for counselors across the entire spectrum to begin to understand how to work with an individual with disability. When I received my master's degree from the University of Northern Colorado, it was in counseling. I didn't understand. I knew assessments, I knew all of that, but there was nothing specifically found about specific disabilities. How do I work with an individual with CP? I know how to test them all day, but how do I work with them? And how do I get them motivated for services? And how do I get them motivated to move to the next realm of what is necessary? And so I didn't know that in my master's. I had to really take a portion of research and began to understand all of that. And so I think it's really important that counselors have a class just on disabilities.
I want to echo something that's in the chat. Andrea talked about being a KCREP site reviewer. One of the issues, we do not have enough KCREP site reviewers, especially with rehab. So for example, my program went up, although one was definitely rehab. I won't mention who that is, but anyway. And then the other two had been, they were familiar, maybe even had gotten a degree long time ago in rehab, but they didn't really understand rehab. And there's some nuances that's a little different. So especially now that we're having more and more programs that since the merger that are going up, because we had a delay for a good year and a half, almost 2 years. So now the bulk of the programs are now starting to go up, and everybody didn't go under the clinical rehab. Okay. So there's a lot of traditional ones out there. So I would definitely say get trained as a site reviewer, because they are hurting for reviewers. It's even better because you don't go anywhere. Well, I mean, I kind of like going places, but now since we really don't go anywhere, they're very they're a little easier to do because they are online. But I definitely would say that we are really hurting for KCREP reviewers, with people with knowledge, that has a knowledge and a background with rehab counseling.
Thank you. And I'm looking at the time. We have just 4 minutes, and really thinking about our participants and our panelists and how valuable their information has been. I'm going to put the last two questions together. The last two questions are specifically, what steps can we as individuals and members of various rehab communities do to impact and realize the goal of unification? And then the other question, and panelists, you can choose either or both to answer, what is the presence of ARCA at the learning institutions that offer rehab counseling programs?
I guess since I started first, I'll end first. I started out as an ARCA student member at South Carolina State University. That's how I knew ARCA even existed. And I got into a leadership role as a master's level student. Then when I went to the University of Iowa, there's also a student chapter there. So ARCA student chapters are present at various institutions. We're not present at all, but we are present at various institutions. I think it depends a lot on the professors at the institution and what organizations they are a part of, because I do have a colleague at another institution, and most of their students join NRA and NAMREC, but that's the identity of their professors. So again, we get back to that unification. So while we're present at a number of institutions, and that was my job as the student task force representative, to reach out, send a welcome letter to all the chairs at all the different institutions and ask them to get a student chapter started and get students involved in ARCA. So we are at some institutions. So hopefully if we have any professors in this webinar, if you don't have an ARCA student chapter, if you reach out to Daniel and get one started, but we are present at some institutions, yes.
Good answer.
Any other closing thoughts from our panelists?
I just wanted to thank ARCA and Florida Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development for this opportunity. As a retired person, you can be left in the dust, and there's good parts about that, and also it's nice to have the opportunity to share my opinion and experience, and to learn from so many other people, from the chat and etc. And so I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I'd like to wish all of the mothers and the mother surrogates in the audience a happy Mother's Day, for serving in that nurturant and role modeling fashion tirelessly, day in and day out.
And I just want to ditto what Henry said. It was a wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Daniel, and for putting this together. It was it's just something I've been wanting to do for a really long time with past presidents. I think every time that I hop on the board, I always say this, but you all have made this into fruition. So I want to tell you all thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for calling us all together. I think this discussion was necessary so that we could see the need for advancements within the field, and we needed to have this courageous conversation so that we can move forward. And thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Florida Counseling. Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who has come here to engage, because you thought that this was very important to be here. And so that shows in numbers when you are here. I went through all the lists to see who was here and who wasn't here. So I know some people who weren't here, and I'm going to send them an email. And there's some others. I'm like, thank you. I appreciate your support in being here as well.
Thank you all for this opportunity. I hope everyone got something that they can take away and how we can continue to advance our profession.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you so much. I mean, as you can tell, the chat box says it all. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for your leadership in ARCA, your leadership in the profession, your continued leadership, the work that you're doing to help impact our profession, and really for sharing your wisdom with us as well. And a special thank you also to our ASL interpreters and to Christine and just everyone for taking the time to be here today. And if for whoever feels open to doing so, on your way out of the webinar, feel free to write in the chat box, maybe something that you've learned today that you plan on implementing, whether in your program, your community, or your professional role. We'd love to be able to kind of see where everybody will be going with this wonderful information. And in the chat box, you'll also find a link for an evaluation, and that will be required for CEUs. And that link will also be sent to you via email. And so we do ask that you complete that prior to 5 p.m. on May 12th. And as well, there's some information about our upcoming webinar, which will be on Friday, June 4th. And again, we just thank our wonderful panelists for your time and your leadership. And to our attendees, thank you.